Hey guys, we're going to be drawing a person in a dynamic pose using a reference image. The reference that I'll be using today and taking a look at is this one. This person is practicing ancient martial arts. I believe it's Kalaripayattu. And he's crouched down super low. There's a lot of pretty rich detailed pieces like the wrapping around the wrist and hand. But really what we're going to start with is the overall angles. We're going to map out the angles of the arms, the legs, the positioning of the head and the body in relation to that, the hips, okay? And I'll be showing you how you can start doing that starting with just basic shapes. So, to begin with, this should sound pretty familiar to you at this point, but you want to hold your pencil in such a way that it encourages you to draw light and draw rough. For me, I prefer this kind of grip right here, right? Well, let's map out a small circle right about here, okay? This represents the person's cranium, and so the circle I just drew roughly, right, is just the top portion of his head. Now let's map out the angle of his face. It's not quite vertical, it's just slightly diagonal, okay? His chin, right, which is bearded, comes in right over here. And approximately right over here is where you see his ear. We could just use a small curved line to represent that for now. And that's it, okay? We want to keep things as simple as possible for now. I want to start thinking about the spine, okay? Check out the angle of this person's spine, how low he's crouching. In this view, if I were to estimate the angle of this, let's say it's slightly more than 30 degrees, right, from the horizontal. So the spine's going to meet up with the base of the skull, and the spine itself has a curvature to it. It's an S-curve, but overall, we want to see that approximate 30-degree angle. I have that a little too steep, actually. Okay, about 30 degrees would be about that low, actually. That looks more correct, and then you can start to think about the curvature of it. Okay, so there's our spine. In terms of, let's see, I do want to draw the body, but I want to first think about the angle between the shoulders. Okay, the angle between the shoulders, let's see, from the horizontal on the other side, the angle here, I would say, is a little bit less than 30 degrees. Okay, so we can map that out to be looking kind of like that. This is the line between the shoulders, and the traps form a kind of triangle from the neck to about that point. Right about here, you can draw a socket for where the shoulders would be at as an oval, okay? And the socket for the shoulder would be kind of dotted over here, but it's on the other side of the body, okay? Because we're looking at this person in a natural perspective, right, where things are slightly foreshortened, the left side of his body, we don't see as much of it versus the right side of his body, okay? Meaning on this side of the spine, this distance is shorter than the distance over here. And that's what we want. I want to chunk in the rest of his torso. Okay. And I'm going to map out right over here, approximating the position of his waist. And I imagine that as a hoop for now. So checking back in with my reference over here. I think I have the overall mass of his upper body mapped out fairly accurately. Okay. Now over here is where his pelvis would be. Because of his position, let's see. Yeah, let's map out another hoop this way to map out the bowl of the pelvis. And then, like Jim Lee mentions, we kind of want to draw some tighty-whities. Okay, so here's like the socket for his right leg to receive. And then there's the tighty-whities. Okay, the leg on the other side, the socket for it is hidden. Okay, I think his hips and the pelvis itself should be a little bit wider. So I'm going to make some adjustments there. There you go. Slightly larger tighty-whities. Okay. Okay, we've got some sockets for the arms as well as for the legs. Let's start to map in those smaller limbs. When I take a look at this arm, there is a slight bend in the elbow over here, and there's a fold in the arm right there, okay, between the forearm and the triceps. However, the overall angle of the arm overall is fairly straight. From the horizontal, which would be about here, maybe it's at about, I don't know, that's 90 right there, something like 10 degrees or 15 degrees or something like that. Okay, it's pretty shallow is what I'm trying to say. And the hand, the palm of the hand goes right up to the what do you call it? The tailbone. Okay. So let's map out from this point over here, right, to the base of the tailbone. That's the overall angle of that arm. There is a slight bend right about here. You'd find the elbow, so you could draw a small thing to locate that. The forearm is slightly bent this way, while the upper portion of the arm and the triceps is right there. So we're just mapping out, for now, as basic ovals, the hand, the forearm, the elbow, and the upper arm. Once you got that down, you can start to map in the larger limbs. Okay, so here is the upper arm, the bicep and the tricep. And then the forearm, we can imagine as a tapering cylinder. Okay, and then here's that bend right over here between the upper arm and the forearm. You want to keep track of that. The hands can be tricky, okay? You don't want to keep them as an oval. If you looked at my other video on how to draw a singular hand, what I said was it can be useful to imagine the palm of the hand as a sort of rectangular prism, sort of like a block of tofu to begin with. Okay, so if this is my rectangular prism that's slightly irregular like that, the fingers, right, the index to the pinky fingers will be radiating out from this side, whereas the thumb would be coming out from this corner over here. Okay, so here's the thumb, and the way this person's positioning his hand, index is pointing outward, and then all the rest are kind of fanning inward. I'm just mapping out the overall positioning for now. The ring's coming in like that, and the pinky is coming up like that. So that's super rough for now. I'm going to lighten that up slightly. So I can add some more definition to that hand. So this is the palm. I'm going to round out the meaty portion of the thumb a bit. And then over here for the top thumb tip, I'm going to draw that out in a shape that kind of looks like that. See the palm over here. And let's see. I'm going to map out a curve like this. And we do see the pinky slightly bent like this. Now when it comes to the tip of the pinky, I don't want to round it out too much. I want there to be a point like you see over here. Okay, that's where the fingernail would be. And up from there, you have the ring finger. Coming in at an angle like this. Most of the middle finger is hidden, but you do see the tip of it. And then you see the bottom side of the index and a little bit of tip. And then the side of the hand, for now I'm just going to keep it blocky. Okay. Checking back with the reference. So far, that's what it took to map out that one arm. Now let's take a look at the arm in the back. This has much more of a bigger bend. And he's coming in to reach his dagger over here with his hand, and he's got a light grip on it. Looks like just with his thumb and index finger. It's pretty cool. But we want to follow the same process, map out where the elbow is. Okay, where the forearm, the angle of the upper arm versus the forearm, and then draw in the hand last. Okay, because that's kind of the most challenging part. The elbow, all right. No, I didn't quite get that right. So I'm erasing that because the angle of this arm is actually sloping downward, okay? And the line that I started drawing was sloping, sloping upward, and we don't want that, okay? So I do want to capture that angle as closely as I can. Elbow, the bone of the elbow is right about here. Forearm comes in somewhere like this, and the hand overall takes up about this much space. Okay. And after we got that, the same way we did with the other arm, I'm going to use an oval like this to map out the angle of the upper arm. Bring it into the shoulder over here. Here's the underside where you see the bicep. And then the forearm tapers down toward the wrist. It gets thinner toward the wrist. So we want to take account of that. This hand is in sort of a tricky position because we really don't see a whole lot of the wrist. We do see the top of the hand, okay? And we can kind of use that. See this top of the hand that I'm mousing over? We're going to treat that like that and sort of visualize that as a mostly rectangular block. The angle of the knuckles looks sort of like this. And then the top side of the hand you can map out with kind of a tapering parallelogram like that. And this portion that tapers in toward the knuckles. And it's really out of this face over here that I'm pointing at, where the index through pinky fingers are going to come out of. We don't actually see the thumb in this view. I'm going to round out this edge into a slight curve. And then the pinky we see bent coming in this way. I'm going to imagine this pinky also as a kind of a rectangular prism as well, with a rounded tip for the tip of the finger. See the ring finger. Okay. And then the middle finger, the longest one. And then we have index right there. Got it fairly close, I'd say. Can round out some of these edges and then connect it to the wrist over here that's wrapped up. Okay. I do want to add in this Chris right there. I think it's a Chris, but before I do that, let's work from the largest and most important elements down. So let's capture the legs. Okay, starting with this large one over here. Let's say it's the thigh is almost at a horizontal, but just slightly sloping down. So this would be horizontal, but just slightly sloping down, right? Coming in, connecting to the socket over here. I'm just mapping out the bone. The knee, if we look on the reference, the knee is pretty much vertically aligned with the shoulder, just slightly toward the right of it. So you can map that out over here. Here's where the bend of the knee would be. You can map that out with an oval. And then the calf comes down at an angle like this. Slightly, it's a steep slope. Okay, it's not quite vertical. Then, in a similar way that we've done with the arms, large oval. This guy's got really big, strong legs. Okay, large oval for the thigh. Smaller oval for the muscle of the calf behind the shin bone. And then have that bend downward over here. Okay. As far as the leg on the far side, we actually see the knee being covered up by this arm. So this knee is almost vertical, but it's got a steep slope. Okay, and it's kind of pointed toward the pocket of where that elbow is. So the socket is over here. That's the angle of the leg. The knee is right about here. We see a little bit of space, right? This empty space in this triangle. But that the thigh really wraps around here. And I didn't notice this before, but we actually do see that person's foot over here, which makes sense. So the shin's coming down, right, and it's hidden by the body. We see the heel. Oh, I'm sorry, no, we actually don't. That's a shadow. Okay, that's a shadow. So let's leave it be for now. Okay, so that's the overall mapping. Now let's start to think about adding in more of the details, more of the finer elements, with a particular focus on capturing and mapping out the major shadows here. First, let's start with this Chris. That Chris is almost aligned with the spine. Okay, it goes straight up the middle of his back, and it's almost between it's between his shoulder blades. Okay, so we want to, I'd say it goes about up to there, and the angle of it is something like this. Just want to map it in roughly for now. It does have a slight curve to it. Okay. See the hilt over here. And wrapping around this person's waist, securing the kris, which is a ceremonial dagger, I believe. I might be wrong. It might not be a kris, but let's just call it a dagger. But there's a waistband over here with lots of intricate wrinkles on it. And I map out the wrist wrap, roughly. It goes around the palm, like you see there. We also see a wrist wrap around this wrist, and there's a tie, right, with some of the cordage falling off there. This person has a nice long hair that's tied neatly in the back. For now, I'm just going to draw a couple ovals to show it's a slightly wavy, curly hair. Okay, and he does have a necklace too. Some beads. Okay. Now comes the time, now that we have all the major elements mapped out, now comes the time for us to map out these shadows over here. It's really strong sunlight in this reference photo, so plenty of opportunity for us to notice the transitions between light and dark. It is a slightly gradual transition, but if you notice, it goes from very light to quite dark very quickly. Okay, the fall off is quick. So we're going to treat that in our drawing as pretty much a hard line to begin with. You might want to lighten up a lot of these lines that we have in the middle of the arm that we use to map things out. Okay, I accidentally erased these lines for the wrist wrap, but that's fine. There's actually a knot right there too. So looking at this drawing, the line of the shadow, imagine simply, right, falls about there, wraps around the elbow here, and this person's quite athletic, so you see some of the shadow jogging back around his tricep before it makes a crescent shape like this around his shoulder. And then here you can start to define the actual shape of some of these limbs with a little more accuracy. Okay. But this terminator that I drew here is what we're really focusing on for now. I mapped out the overall direction, and I'm looking at my reference now to notice, okay, here's a shadow created by one of his veins. I'm going to put a little bit more contouring on the shadow on his tricep. And what I'm doing here, guys, is I'm imagining myself as like a caterpillar or some kind of creature that's walking very slowly across this contour. So I'm trying to notice every dip, every change in direction and map that as accurately as I can. So coming back in over here. start to add in some of the more subtle changes in direction in the arm. Okay, like there's a small dip over here between the muscle of the shoulder and the upper arm. Okay. So everything on this side of the arm is in that shadow, and you can lightly, you don't have to darken it in a lot, but you can lightly shade it in like this, so you know what that line is for. Okay, it's showing you where it goes from light to dark, and we can continue that line. By the time it gets to the wrist wrap over here, you see all the small shadows in between the wrinkles of the wrap, and that's a nice detail that we want to recreate as accurately as possible. Okay. I'm going to lightly shade in the area underneath that contour as well. We have that knot over here, so we're getting into a lot of the finer details now. Okay, kind of terminates there. I'm going to shade that in. That about does it. Right over here, the kind of knife hand, blocky portion of that hand, we're going to continue on with mapping out the shadows, and it's still wrapped, so we see some of that, the texturing of that shadow. Okay. There we are. Lightly shade this in. And then when it comes to the side of the pinky, we also do see that shadow extend all the way to the tip of the pinky. And it's also present on the side of each of the fingers. See there? And the thumb as well. And a small shadow, very dark shadow, between the space, in the space between the palm and the wrap. Some detail shadows coming in over here on the wrap itself. Okay. Again, we're just mapping the shadows and lightly shading in. We're not necessarily taking it as dark as it is in the reference image. Okay. Next over here, I'm mapping out the shadow created by the vest this person is wearing. Okay. So that shape that I just drew is the shape that you can see right over here that I'm mousing over. Basically, this is taking what you guys learned in terms of contour drawing with a focus on shadows, right? And combining it with skills we've been practicing about drawing things from a reference while taking into account relative angles and proportions. Really critical skills in order to be able to accurately recreate an image like this. So now I'm mapping out the shadow on the shoulder, cast onto the shoulder by the vest. I have this thin crescent shape like that. And I can start to refine some of the details around here. The vest comes in like so, and then curves upward over here toward the neck. We do see a bit of the body, the chest over here. And all of that is in shadow as well. I'm going to lighten up the knife. Basically erased it actually. I'm going to redraw the slight curvature of the blade. Okay, it's got a waviness to it. What I'm really interested in though, and what the reason why I redrew it is because it's casting a shadow onto this person's back and on the vest. So first I'm just going to map out this shadow right underneath the knife. And then by the time it gets to the wrapping around the waist, we see some of that texturing going on. Okay, these long, sharp shapes over here. The wrapping goes around the hilt of the knife. And we see a lot of this similar shadows with that nice texture created by the wrinkles in the wrapping. Here's the shiny part of the hilt. And then the wrapping continues on the bottom. So we can continue that shadow down there. Because the hilt itself is metallic, it's actually reflecting a lot of the light, so the shadow doesn't behave quite the same way over there. It's a small detail, but essentially a dark line right over here will suffice for now. Let's keep going. We have a nice shape like this on the other side of the vest. It's kind of billowing slightly upward. And that terminates right about here. And there's some minor shapes like that. And then before, right over here, it wraps around the shoulder in this way. You see a small shadow right there. Okay. I'm going to erase some of the construction lines that I used before, so the back is a little clean. And if you notice right at the tip of the knife, it's making some contact with the back of the vest and creating a little fold right there. It's a small thing, but I think it'll add noticeable detail, a little bit of tactility to this image. Let's work on the shadow of the other arm over here. In the reference, you see that the lower side of the bicep, right, is creating an interesting shadow that's like almost an S-curve, and it wraps around. The shadow wraps around where the tricep is connecting over here with the body. So first, want to map out that nice S-curve. Right, here's the inside of the elbow, and then here's the outside of the bicep. This is the terminator, where the bicep is at. And then here's where the shadow loops around and gets sharper. Lightly shaded in. And then the shadow wraps around and gets much thinner on this side, where we see the forearm. Okay. It does wrap back around over here slightly in a point, following the musculature. The main part of it is just on that one side of the forearm. I'm going to erase the rest of the construction lines over here within the arm. I'm going to lighten these up. They do transition out, a little smoother than that. Okay, we'll leave it there. Moving on to the wrist wrap over here. Not too much of it is in shadow, but we do see some dark lines coming in like this. Some of them cut quite close together. We had a ribbon over here on this side. Useful tip for you guys. If you're working with your palm over a portion of the drawing that you work really hard on, I recommend you put a piece of paper like this so you don't mess anything up. Okay. So a ribbon was over here, but I'm really going to draw the shape of the shadows without worrying about the outlines of it too much because it's a small detail. It's casting a shadow onto the wristband like this. That for the strap. And then see the shadow on the strap coming down like so. We'll keep it there. Now we get to work with the hand. This whole side of the hand is dark. And it remains dark up until it gets to the point of the knuckles, where you see about half of the digit in shadow. I'm going to erase some of these lines to make the form of it a little clearer. The shadows over here stick to the bottom side, like so. Okay, I'd say that's coming along pretty all right. Here's the waistband. I am gonna create a shadow right there that I kind of missed. And some small little slivers of darkness on this side. Varying thicknesses at varying distances from each other to show texture in the wrapping around the waist. And right there should help to differentiate it a little bit from the rest of the from the fingers right above it. Okay. Same over here. There's a thicker shadow in this sort of shape. Along with some smaller, thinner ones coming in these V shapes right here. I don't know a lot about Kalaripaya too, but from what I've heard of it, it's purported to be the oldest martial art out there. Right? It originated in India. I think there's a resurgence of its popularity, and people are practicing it a little more, or a lot more. I'm adding in these small shadows at the base of the fingers where they meet the palm. Okay. I'm leaving the head for last. Let's tackle the shadows in the legs, and then we'll get to the head. Right over here, the arm is casting a shadow over this thigh. Okay, so let's just worry about that chunk for now. The shadow's just kind of going over the thigh and taking a sharp bend around along with the elbow towards here. Can lightly shade all this in as well. Now let's take a look at the thigh over here around the pelvis. There's a light area over here, so I'm going to draw this contour line, and then almost all of the thigh over here is in shadow until it gets to this transition point with some pockets of light coming through here and there. So let's draw those collection of contour lines, okay, starting with over here. I'm going to kind of simplify it as just a line coming down like so, and all this is in shadow. and adjust the, we do see his buttocks kind of jutting out a little farther. This is a little different from the reference, but that's totally fine. What I mean by that is that in the reference, his fingertips don't go quite past to that point, but it's all right. It's close enough. Shade in all these areas. And then I'm going to erase some of these construction lines over here around the hips and the thighs. So that I can map in those small bits of light that we saw shining through here, as well as over here. It also, these shadows also show some of the wrinkles and the texture in the clothing. So it gives a little bit of dimension, a little bit of life to this. Let me adjust that, that's a little too long. There we go, a little short like that. And then the shadow wraps around the thigh, goes over. Wraps around the thigh like that. Okay. And then we also see this portion right before the muscle of the calf starts in shadow. So everything inside of here, we can lightly shade in. Just gonna slightly darken these outlines a little bit so we don't lose them. When it comes to shading particularly large areas like this, it's a good idea to work in multiple layers, multiple light layers as much as possible. So my first layer coming down, you're going to be able to see the pencil strokes very easily. To begin with, that's okay. Just, you still want to make it as smooth as possible, but if there's some scratchiness like this, it's totally doable because now I'm coming back in now with a second layer that's going in a different stroke direction, and then overlapping just that second layer smooths things out quite a bit. Makes everything nice and smooth. We don't see as much of that scratchiness as before. Right over here. I'm going to let some of these shadows kind of fuse together. Create one single piece of positive space. Let's leave it there for now. I'm aware that there's a very richly shaped cast shadow over here, but for the purposes of this drawing exercise, let's leave it out for now. Okay, so the calf has some more subtle shadows, some more subtle midtones, and some bumpiness around it. I want to focus on this shadow over here, right beneath the quadricep. Also this one over here, right beneath the kneecap, as well as this shadow right over here against the shin bone, and as well as this dark portion right there underneath the calf muscle. We're actually not going to see a whole lot of this because of the way because of the size of the drawing and the way I cropped it. So this is the shadow underneath the knee. I'm going to erase some of the construction lines here. Smooth it out. And then we also have shadow over here underneath the quadricep. Right over here underneath the calf muscle. And then right there, tapering down. Not that suddenly, but tapering down. Which shin is that? Here's some shadow. It's got some bumpiness to it. There is much more, but we're focusing on the darkest portions for now. Okay. I'll just add in a small amount of midtone right over here. Now let's get to this person's head, the hair, the beard, and the necklace. For the hair, what I'm going to map out is this highlight and a couple little dots of light around the this bun and around, you see this light portion on the ear, okay, as well as the light portions around the beads. And everything else I'm really just going to let it be in the shadow. So I'm mapping out the highlight, and I'm going in a kind of zigzag motion. And then we have this highlight right on the top side of the ear. The hair kind of wraps around this way. There's a shadow behind the ear too. And then this guy's got a really nice beard that sort of wraps around all the way to the neck. You see a tiny bit of the brow bone right there, but it all really ends up in this hairdo, really. There's some irregularity on the back side. Okay. So I'm going to shade in the back side of the ear first. this portion of the ear is going to be slightly lighter. About the same amount of lightness right over here in the skin, but it's still dark. And for the beard and the hair, that's going to be the darkest elements. Before I do that, I'm going to just map out a few slivers of light in the ponytail for me to preserve. And we're going to hit everything else with some light shading. For simplicity's sake, I'm just going to omit that necklace. Okay, this is I think pretty challenging, even without it. Okay, so forgive me if you feel bothered by the non-completion. I am making the beard and the hair, or I'm trying to make it darker so I can differentiate it from the lighter skin on this side. Okay, it's looking all right. The last bit of detail I would add is a few strokes within the hair to kind of break up the kind of blobby edges of this highlight. Some strokes go all the way across, some strokes stop short. And we just want to make the edge condition as natural as possible. Smooth out some of the shading with a second layer. And around the forehead over here, a few baby hairs. Sort of flying away along the outer edges of the hairdo. Around the beard here as well. A little bit of texture around the edge. And over here, where the beard meets with the chin and the neck. A couple strands of hair here and there. Gives it a more natural look. All right, guys. That about does it. You can clean up the construction lines that are left over here and there, like you see me doing now. That's how you go ahead and draw a person in a dynamic view while mapping out the angles and also really treating the shadows as the main subjects. Okay? Hope you had fun with that. Good luck. See you in class.